Hello everyone, I'm Kamira Coney and welcome to today's webinar, which is hosted by the Clean Energy Solutions Center in partnership with CLASS. Today's webinar is focused on promoting high-performing off-grid appliances, opportunities for policymakers. Before we begin, I'll quickly go over some of the webinar features. For audio, you have two options. You may either listen through your computer or over your telephone. If you choose to listen through your computer, please select the mic and speakers option in the audio pane. Doing so will eliminate the possibility of feedback and echo. If you choose to dial in by phone, please select the telephone option, and a box on the right side will display the telephone number and audio pin you may use to dial in. If anyone is having technical difficulties with the webinar, you may contact the GoToWebinar's help desk at 888-259-3826 for assistance. If you would like to ask a question, we ask that you use the questions pane where you may type in your question. If you are having difficulties viewing the material, we will be posting PDF copies of the presentations on the Clean Energy Solutions training page after the presentation. The audio recording and presentations will be posted on the training page within a few days of the broadcast and will also be added to the Solutions Center YouTube channel, where you'll be able to find other informative webinars as well as video interviews with thought leaders on clean energy policy topics. Finally, one important note of mention before we begin our presentation. The Clean Energy Solutions Center does not endorse or recommend specific products or services. The information provided in this webinar is featured in the Solutions Center's resource library as one of many best practice resources reviewed and selected by technical experts. Today's webinar agenda is centered around the presentations from Naomi Wagura and our guest panelists Charles Diarra and Nixon Bukachi, who have joined us to discuss on how policymakers can use test methods, quality standards, and labeling to promote high-performing off-grid appropriate appliances. Before we jump into the presentations, I will provide a quick overview of the Clean Energy Solutions Center. Then, following the panelists' presentations, we will have a question and answer session where the panelists will address questions submitted by the audience. At the end of the webinar, you'll be automatically prompted to fill out a brief survey as well. So thank you in advance for taking a moment to respond. The Solutions Center was launched in 2011 under the Clean Energy Ministerial. The Clean Energy Ministerial is a high-level global forum to promote policies and programs that advance clean energy technology to share lessons learned and best practices to encourage the transition to global clean energy economy. 24 countries and the European Commission are members, contributing 90% of clean energy investments and responsible for 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. This webinar is provided by the Clean Energy Solutions Centers, which is an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial. The Solutions Center focuses on helping government policymakers design and adopt policy and programs that support the deployment of clean energy technologies. This is accomplished through access to no-cost expert policy assistance and capacity-building activities such as this webinar. The Clean Energy Solutions Center is co-sponsored by governments of Australia and the United States. The Solutions Center provides several clean energy policy programs and services. This includes a team of over 60 global experts that can provide remote and in-person technical assistance to governments and government-supported institutions, a no-cost virtual webinar training on a variety of clean energy topics, partnerships building with the development agencies and regional and global organizations to deliver support, and an online library containing over 3,500 clean energy policy-related publications, tools, videos, and other resources. Our primary audience is made up of energy policymakers, analysts from governments and technical organizations in all countries, but we also strive to engage with private sector NGOs and civil society. The Solutions Center is an international initiative that works with more than 35 international partners across its suite of different programs. Several of the partners are listed above and include research organizations like IRENA and the IEA, programs like C4All, and regionally focused entities such as ECOWAS Centers for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. A marquee feature that the Solutions Center provides is the no-cost expert policy assistant, known as the Ask an Expert. The Ask an Expert service matches policymakers with more than 60 global experts selected as authoritative leaders on specific clean energy finance and policy topics. Again, this assistance is provided free of charge, and if you have any questions for our experts, please submit them through our simple online form at cleanenergysolutions.org/expert. We also invite you to spread the word about this service to those in your networks and organizations. Now, I'd like to provide brief introductions. Mr. Ari Reeves is a senior manager with CLASP, where he leads Lighting Global Quality Assurance, a program focused on identifying and promoting high-quality distributed solar energy projects. Mr. Reeves also has more than 10 years of experience working with public and private sector players in countries all around the world. Next up is Naomi Wagura. Naomi is a senior associate working in CLASP's East Africa office in Nairobi, and leads the CLASP policy engagement in the East African region. In addition, Naomi has worked with the East and Southern African region for more than 5 years in both the off-grid and on-grid energy sectors. At this time, I'm going to hand this over to Naomi for her presentation, and then we will hand it over to Ari so he can introduce our panelists for today.
Hello everyone, this is Naomi Wagura from CLASP. I should have my slides up in just a minute, so you can all see them. Just a second. Okay, sorry about that. So we're going to give an introduction to the policy brief that the Energy for Access Coalition produced, and we're going to go through that and the recommendations that are in that policy brief. So this policy brief was introduced by was produced by CLASP and the Energy Savings Trust on behalf of the Energy Efficiency for Access Coalition, which is a partnership of 13 donor organizations working to accelerate clean energy access through super efficient off and weak grid appliances. This brief was developed in consultation with a diverse group of stakeholders and represents one of the past efforts to synthesize policy options for regulating off-grid appliances. The document explores how test methods and quality standards and labeling programs might be used to promote high quality and energy efficient appliances in off and weak grid markets. So, So the stakeholders that we involved in producing this policy brief include the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority in Kenya, the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, ECRI, the East Africa Center of Excellence for Renewable and Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, sorry. So what this does is, so I'll just give an overview of what off-grid appliances, what the context of off-grid appliances. So high-performing DC appliances are being developed for use in off-grid settings, and these appliances have the potential to transform lives of people that live in off and weak-grid settings. For example, the cooling, irrigation, and communications benefits of off-grid refrigerators, solar water pumps, and televisions have the potential to increase productivity, livelihoods, educational outcomes, and health of millions worldwide. Energy efficient off-grid appliances enable energy access by allowing customers with limited electrical supply, for example, those ones that are running on solar home systems, to run more appliances for longer. Just received a note that you can only see my notes and not my presentation, so sorry about that. Gosh. Yeah, that should be better now. So this slide gives an overview of the impact of using super efficient appliances with solar home systems. This is from a report that the Efficiency for Access Coalition produced. So you can see that there's a 35% difference between using a solar home system with a conventional appliance and using a solar home system with a super efficient appliance. So in the policy brief, we explore a few tools for policymakers. So one of those tools that can be used are test methods. So test methods are standardized methods that they form the foundation for standards, policies, and programs. They enable uniform measurement and comparison of products with different characteristics. So for example, we have some IEC standards for Pico solar products and solar home system kits. That's the IEC test standard 6225795. Globally provides test methods that have been developed by the Efficiency for Access Coalition. So those can be accessed on the Global Leap website. So another tool for policymakers that we explore in the policy brief are standards. So there are two types of standards. We have voluntary standards and mandatory standards. So voluntary standards can establish the minimum performance.
Hey, Naomi?
Yes.
I can present the slides on from my screen.
Okay, that would be better. Thanks, Ari.
Okay, sure. Okay. Is this the right slide?
Yeah, perfect, thanks. So move to the next slide, please. Next slides on the standards. Thank you. Okay, so government standards and labeling initiatives are needed to promote quality and efficiency, as well as to protect consumers. So standards and labeling programs are operational in more than 80 countries and cover 50 different types of appliances and equipment. But most appliances and equipment that are covered by these standards and labeling programs are AC powered. So we have provided a case study on the impact of standards and labeling programs. The case study is on the European Union in the policy brief that you can have a look at. So looking specifically at the type of standards that we have voluntary standards. which build on the stress methods by establishing minimum performance requirements for areas such as durability, safety, truth in advertising, warranty. And these voluntary standards can be used as a stepping stone to mandatory standards. They can also be used in market development initiatives. For example, if you want to run a bulk procurement program or a consumer awareness campaign, then you can use voluntary standards to qualify products that can be involved in those initiatives. And then after you develop voluntary standards, you can then move on to mandatory standards, which are used to ensure that all products that are manufactured or imported into a country meet the minimum requirements. So the benefits of mandatory standards can be significant, especially where you have a lot of poor quality products in the market. Ari, please move to the next slide. So another tool that policymakers can use in regulating appliance markets are labeling programs. So labeling programs allow you to make comparisons between products. So this is what is visible to the consumers and businesses. They're not able to see the standards because that is the document that is used by the government or whichever entity is implementing the standards, but the labeling is consumer facing. So an import standardization mark, for example, can be used to indicate that a product meets national standards. And in more mature markets, you can use an endorsement label. For example, if you're familiar with the US market, we have the Energy Star label, which shows the highest performing appliances in markets. Next slide. So in summary, we have a few tools that we've discussed, the test methods, which provide impartial information. And then we have voluntary standards, which can be used as a stepping stone to mandatory standards. And they can be used in consumer awareness campaigns, to provide tax exemptions and so on. And then you have mandatory standards, which are sometimes called minimum energy performance standards or standards to do with durability, safety, truth in advertising, and warranties. So these standards are mandatory and they can cover both conventional and efficient versions of products. And these are used to eliminate the lowest performing products from the market. And then we have labeling programs, and this make the information regarding performance visible to consumers and businesses that are purchasing their appliances. So this would be used to raise the consumer awareness on product performance and make it easier to identify the products that meet the standards as part of the enforcement efforts. Next slide, Ari. So there are a few considerations that you need to make before you implement standards and labeling programs, especially for off-grid appliances. So you need to look at the market first, understand the market to understand whether it's the appropriate time to introduce standards. Because if you introduce standards too early, then you might end up affecting having a negative impact on the market, and you might stifle the growth of the market. So when standards are developed, you would need to develop them for specific appliances and end users, and this can be phased in over time as the market reaches maturity. And for labeling programs, governments should carefully consider whether the information on the comparison between the products is available, whether you're able to monitor the use of the label, and also campaigns to educate the consumer would need to be made, because a label without consumer awareness is not very useful to the end user. Next slide, please. So one of the recommendations that we make in the policy brief on how to introduce standards and labeling programs for off-grid appliances is that first you would need to undertake market research and stakeholder mapping. This would help you understand the market and the broader environment and build the confidence in the proposed measures. So the market research can reveal several important details. So on the demand side, the decision makers should consider whether the technology is widely available and affordable, and whether there is demand for it, and the extent to which affordability is a barrier. Then on the supply side, decision makers should consider the number of products that can meet the standard and the number of suppliers. So a market assessment would help you understand the impact of the standards on the businesses, so you avoid unintended negative consequences. Next slide, please. So another recommendation is to build on existing tools and consider a regional approach. So this recommendation concerns harmonizing test methods and standards in a region, for example. So when you harmonize your test methods and the standards, then you lower the cost of testing and certification and the overall cost for companies to comply with the standards and labeling requirements that you put in place. So, for example, if a company sells in the Kenyan, Tanzanian, and Ugandan market in East Africa, then when you have harmonized standards and labeling requirements, then the company would just need to test once, and then they're able to place their market in all three markets, as opposed to having bespoke standards in every country. And so they would have to test the products to conform to the standards in each market, which really raises the cost of compliance. So alignment also makes it less expensive to enforce compliance and identify and share information on non-compliant products across markets. So for example, in my example in East Africa, then the Ugandan government, for example, could share information on which products don't comply with the standards in Uganda, and share this information with the Tanzanian government for them to take action if similar products are in their market. And then another point to consider is the country representatives of regional institutions are encouraged to push for new regional measures that build on existing test methods or standards. So, for example, the existing test methods at the international level, either ISO or IEC, and so aligning with these international test methods is encouraged. And at the national level, decision makers are encouraged to check whether an existing international, regional, or national test method or standard can meet their needs before developing their own. Given that it takes a lot of resources to develop test methods and standards, then looking externally to see if there's already an existing test method or standard, then reduces the cost of developing the standards. So another recommendation is, sorry, Larry, next slide. Developing a roadmap and engaging the stakeholders. So from the stakeholder mapping, a government would have identified all the stakeholders that are involved in an industry. And so you can then develop a roadmap so that the stakeholders know exactly what is coming. So for example, if you're going to introduce voluntary standards, let them know when the voluntary standards will be in effect and what they need to do to comply with those voluntary standards, and then when that voluntary standard will move to being a mandatory standard. So this really helps the stakeholders to plan ahead so that the regulations don't catch them by surprise. And it also makes the policy and regulatory environment as predictable as possible. So as an example that is provided in the policy brief, India used an energy efficiency roadmap to transform its room air conditioning market. So the BEE, the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, launched a voluntary policy for fixed speed ACs in 2006 that then became a mandatory policy in 2009. And then the policy has been incrementally revised. So there were revisions in 2015 and 2018, and this was communicated to the stakeholders ahead of time so that they knew, for example, in 2 years, they would revise the standard for room ACs. So this would be ideal if you were to introduce standards. Just let the stakeholders or the companies or the people that have to comply with the standards know what is coming. Next slide, please. So that's a brief overview of the policy brief. And this gives you a few links that you can access the policy brief on the website and the S&L guidebook. So this is developed by CLASP, and it provides a very good overview of how to introduce standards and labeling programs, and gives examples of successful standards and labeling programs on the internationally. And then we have the global lip test methods and related reports. So these are on the Efficiency for Access website, and you can access this online. And then we have the Equip Data website, which publishes information on all the refrigerated off-grid appliances that CLASP under the Efficiency for Access Coalition has tested. And this is provided free of charge. And then we have the policy database on the CLASP website, which gives a summary of policies, standards and labeling policies around the world. And then we have any questions, any questions that you have for us, you can send them to us on that email address, info@energyforaccess.org. So that's it. Thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, please let us know and we'll answer them. And apologies again for the technical hiccups at the beginning.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Naomi. Perfect. Ari, did you want to say a little bit about our panelists, or a little bit more about what Naomi just went over?
Well, Myra, we're in the unfortunate position of our panelists having not shown up. So one possibility, unless they're out there and they just haven't identified themselves yet. So Nixon, Charles, are either of you calling in by chance? Raise your hand or type something in the chat if you are. The other thing we could do is we could open it up for questions from participants.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions.
And wait and see if our panelists show up. We could, another thing, it's just a little bit of a stretch, we could take volunteers from the list from participants who are currently on the call. If anyone wants to be grilled about what's going on in their country with respect to policies related to off-grid appliances.
Yes, those are both great options.
So why don't we open it up for Q&A, and if anyone wants to volunteer, you can certainly promote people to presenters, right?
I could, yes.
Okay.
1 second, let's just show. All right. Is it showing my screen? Why isn't it showing anything? What is going on? Ari, do you mind taking back controls? I'm having issues with my computer.
Yeah. You want me to make myself the presenter?
Yes. Okay. Beautiful. Okay, this should be going through. So, I mean, at this time, please, anybody, if you have any questions or concerns, or you just have some, or any comments that you wanted to add, please add it to the questions pane on your screen. That would be great.
Oh, great. Looks like we have a volunteer. I can share my experience in Tanzania from Kareem Elbana. Myra, could you make Kareem a panelist?
Let's see. 1 second, all right?
Okay.
What was the name?
Kareem Elbana.
I am not seeing her name. Let's see.
Karim, about halfway down.
There we go. Kar Elbana. Let's see. I can make her a presenter, yes. Is that what she wants, or she just wants to speak?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
All right. Let's see here. Actually, 1 second. Cancel that. Can you speak for us? You should be able to speak.
Yes, I can. Yes.
Perfect. You're on there. You're able to speak.
Yes. Hi.
You're on the air.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for volunteering. The first question then I have for you is, what's going on in Tanzania with respect to, well, first maybe you could just introduce yourself and tell us what organization you're with.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, hi everyone, and thank you, Ari and Naomi, for giving me the floor. Yes, I'm not very experienced in that much when it comes to professional experience, but I did my master thesis in Tanzania because my master's was studying solar energy in Sweden. And we had this project through Engineers Without Borders in Sweden. They had a school, off-grid school. It was like a secondary school for girls in Tanzania, in a rural area. And I went there because we had a off-grid PV system powering the whole school for 200 girls, and we had some technical issues there. So yeah, I mean, I can share my experience from this project, not talking about the whole of Tanzania, but specifically about this off-grid school. Hello?
Hi, that was great.
So yeah, I mean, does this meet the agenda, or?
I mean, you can just kind of just how Ari was explaining, just talk about, just like you said, just share your experience on what you've been, what Ari just explained in your experience, any suggestions or how that's created any other opportunities, that kind of stuff. Anything you kind of just can share with us would be amazing.
Yes, sure. As I said,
yeah, hi, Kareem. I'm back. I got kicked off, but I'm back. Sorry about that.
Sure. That's okay. Yeah, I mean, as I said, we had this PV off-grid system. It was around 5 kilowatts, and the problem is we had some power cuts in the PV system, and also our battery bank suddenly started not to work anymore. And I went there to do my technical and my social research, and through a lot of calculations and also simulation softwares, I discovered that we were losing actually half of the electricity that was generated by this off-grid PV system. And the reason was that this electricity was mainly powering LED lamps for the school, and besides some other loads such as a water pump. But the reactive energy consumed from this lamps were really high, up to like half of the energy was already lost. And to make it simple and not very technical biased, reactive energy is something that is needed to power the loads, but it's actually kind of like lost or like useless. It's needed, but the less you have it, the more efficient you have your device. And so, as I said, we were losing half of this energy, and the conclusion was that we needed to replace the whole light bulbs and the whole lighting system in the school, and replace it with the more efficient LED lamps, which were not actually present in this market in this rural area. And we had to carry on discussions how we can bring more efficient light bulbs, which is very basic needs for those people right there, and to bring it to the local economy and the local market there. And it might sound very simple problem, but it really affected the whole energy consumption in the whole school. Like, for example, sometimes we had the whole system shut down because of overload caused by this reactive energy, and then the students cannot, and those girls cannot study or continue their life missions every day.
Kareem, is there something that you see the government of Tanzania could do to help remedy the situation?
I'm actually I'm Egyptian, so I'm already African, but I live now in Germany, and I'm sure that even within the same country itself, I mean, we cannot standardize the whole situation in each country in Africa, or even within the same country. Like, if you have been to Africa, I mean, Africa is super large, and even inside Tanzania itself, every area has its own circumstances and conditions. And I'm not sure the role of the government, how would it be, because I mainly focus my work on the bottom-up development. So I rather focus on how to empower those local markets and local people. And then the policymakers, of course, can help with the, I could say, standardizing, and also not allowing those low quality products to penetrate into the market, because those people are really vulnerable for climate change and for energy supply. And if they cannot afford it, and then if they can barely afford it, and then they afford low quality products, and they lose half of this energy, it's really bad situation, and it's a lot of resources. So in my opinion, we were developing the idea that how we can help those markets and empower the local people to have those high quality, or I mean, I don't want to say high quality, because in Europe this is like normal quality, I mean, but if you can say that, more efficient devices into the local market. And then the second pickup that I would also mention, that it was really important as well that we can move electricity from only consumption, which is mainly light in this case, into rather than empowerment and economy, fostering the economy through, for example, DC welding machines. Like, we need more appliances that are much more compatible with solar energy systems and PV systems that can actually empower them to make profits, because once they are able to make profits from using renewable energy systems, then we can achieve sustainable development. But keeping depending on the donations to only power some light bulbs, I mean, we can debate around it.
Well, thanks for your comments, Kareem. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jeremy volunteered to offer some perspective on the topic of standards and labels for off-grid products. And I wonder, Kamira, could you promote Jeremy to a presenter or a panelist?
Absolutely. Give me 1 second. All right, Jeremy, you should be able to speak. Go ahead and say hello.
Hi, yeah, this is Jeremy Tate.
Hello.
Yeah, so hi. Yeah, just a quick word of introduction. Yeah, I've been pleased to be working with the Efficiency for Access Coalition over the past year or so, helping to work with quite a large group of stakeholders from the sector to develop a technology roadmap for off-grid and weak grid refrigerators, looking at the current market for refrigerators in off-grid and weak-grid, and trying to work out what the technology needs might be for growing that market in the future. But during that process, we came across an awful lot of non-technology issues and barriers that would also need to be addressed, and some of those are quite interesting. But on the particular topics you've been talking about in the introductory presentation, some interesting things came to my mind having looked at the situation for refrigerators. And I think the situation for refrigerators is going to be a bit different to the situation for lamps and fans and sort of charging equipment, which is already fairly well established in the off-grid area. Refrigerators are very new. And I've got some suggestions for some discussion, really, because one of the issues we came across was that the needs in terms of performance of refrigerators in the off-grid market don't really coincide entirely with the needs for on-grid conventional refrigerators in advanced economies. And a couple of the areas that were particularly different were on repairability, for one significant aspect, and the whole durability of the appliance, operating in harsh conditions, high ambient temperatures, high humidities often. And in terms of repairability, that's particularly important to make the financing work. They represent a very substantial investment for the user, whether it's a business, particularly if it's a household. And so these appliances would have to last longer than the financing plan that makes it possible to buy them. And the robustness and durability of conventional appliances, particularly very cheap appliances that are used in many other parts of the world, simply may not be appropriate to these markets. And so the question is about when to intervene. I mean, I do understand the potential problem of setting standards too early in a market, and it could limit growth. But what do our listeners think about the need to establish market appropriate appliances? And is there a risk of a market being flooded with products which are appropriate for an advanced economy off-grid, highly affordable appliance, but may not be the best or most appropriate products for this other market? Another significant issue for refrigerators that the stakeholders latched onto as we were looking at the specifications was controllability. And a piece of refrigeration equipment represents a substantial load for a small off-grid system, particularly if it's a commercial appliance or if it's an ice maker, for example. And the appliance doesn't have to be powered all the time. It could be used in load management in the system. And if an appliance is controllable by a central load management system, then it can be switched on and off as power is available. And it can help businesses to grow revenues, and therefore businesses can afford to pay the higher power. And so it's attractive, but it's a high load. It's a potentially troublesome load if it's not fully controllable, and controllability is another aspect that I think is different to what you'd see in conventional appliances, the need for control through a network. So there's some interesting differences between your conventional appliances and appliances that might be necessary for this market. And so I'm wondering, is it worth looking at making the case for earlier intervention, for setting standards very early in the market, to help steer the market in a more sustainable direction that's sustainable on the economic side, but also on the environmental impact side? So maybe some things that people may want to comment on. does that seem is early intervention with standards and labeling actually appropriate perhaps for refrigerators in the off-grid market? I could say more about the technology roadmap, but I'll leave that there if others would like to comment. Have I lost connection?
I can hear you, Jeremy.
No, Jeremy, we can hear you.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm just restraining myself from commenting and giving everyone else a platform to say whatever might be on their mind. In terms of introducing standards really early in the market, because for refrigerators, it's a very, very new market, right? As opposed to, so that might stifle innovation and so on. But then, yeah, you don't want scrap products getting into the market and then trying to steer the market away from those scrap products later on once the market matures.
Yes.
So it'll be great to hear what everybody else thinks, apart from the Energy for Access coalition members.
We also got a question here about how we developed the policy brief and who we consulted with and so on. Maybe I should just say a few words about that.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So we developed the policy brief over the last 4 months or so, 4 or 5 months. And we was CLASP and the Energy Saving Trust on behalf of the Efficiency for Access Coalition. And we developed it based on our knowledge of the policy space related to off-grid appliances, and based on our experience working with off-grid energy systems, eco-solar products, and SHS kits, and with such off-grid appliances as refrigerators, televisions, fans, and solar water pumps, and also our collective experience with standards and labeling programs for on-grid appliances. We put together a draft and shared it with a number of stakeholders from different spheres, including a number of consultants, some government representatives, both at the country level and at the regional level. We have very good participation from Charles Diarra from ACRI and Nixon Bukachi from the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority in Kenya in particular, and that's why we invited them to serve as panelists today. We also shared the draft with some development agencies that we know are working in this space, and really were able to improve the document a lot with all of their input, and produced the document that hopefully you've had a chance to see. If you haven't, it is available from the Efficiency for Access website, which is efficiencyforaccess.org, along with a number of other excellent resources, including the test methods and other items that, other resources that Naomi went through a little while back. And let's see what else we have here. We got a question. Could you share more on the different roles that you see for voluntary and mandatory standards, the pros and cons of each, especially the dangers of mandatory standards? Naomi, do you want to get started on that? answering that one.
Could you repeat the question again, Ari? Sorry.
The question was, could you share more on the different roles that you see for voluntary and mandatory standards?
Oh, okay.
Especially the dangers of mandatory standards, which you just touched on with Jeremy a few minutes ago also.
Yeah. I'll quickly go through that again, and maybe a bit slower this time. So for voluntary standards, for example, if you're familiar with the Lighting Global Quality Assurance Program, so those could have been considered voluntary standards in a lot of economies, and were used by a lot of non-governmental organizations and some governments. So for example, if you want to set up a tax exemption scheme for the most efficient, for example, or the best performing off-grid refrigerators, then you might want to set a standard such that only the products that meet that standard can apply for the tax exemption, but it's still a voluntary standard in the sense that it's not required for all products coming into the country to meet that standard. So that's one of the ways that you can use a voluntary standard. And it also helps prepare the way and the industry and the market for upcoming mandatory standards if you aim to introduce mandatory standards later on. So it gives you time for the industry, for the market to interact with what you're proposing before it becomes a mandatory standard. And it can also be used for other market development initiatives like bulk procurement. So for example, if a government wanted to transform the off-grid solar water pumping market, for example. So once they wanted to increase the uptake of solar water pumping technology in their country, then they could set up a bulk procurement program where, for example, there's a bulk procurement program in India where the government has set certain requirements for products that can be included in the bulk procurement program. And so those standards, if a solar water pump meets that standard, then it can benefit from the bulk procurement program set by the government. So those are just examples of ways that you can use a voluntary standard. And then at the same time, you're also testing how applicable is the standard to your market. Is it time yet to introduce a mandatory standard? So then you move to a mandatory standard. For example, once you feel that the market is mature enough, once you've engaged with the stakeholders enough for them to have understood what the standard covers, how to meet it, what are the requirements, and so on. And the mandatory standards then eliminate the poorest quality or the poorest performing products from the market. So those would be the two distinct differences between a voluntary standard versus a mandatory standard. Ari, do you have anything else to add?
I think that's good. I would also just kind of emphasize that any standard, whether voluntary or mandatory, sends a signal to manufacturers about what's expected of them in terms of product design, and so it's kind of about the strength of the signal. And if once you move to adopting a mandatory standard, then that's a requirement that is incumbent on all products that wish to be marketed in a given jurisdiction. And so at that point, it's quite clear this is what's required. But even with a voluntary standard, you can do quite a lot to make it clear that this is what's expected in general, but then offer a little bit more flexibility in terms of so as not to stifle further product innovation and so on. I also wanted to comment on in response to a question about regional versus national standards that we received. I just wanted to make it clear that, well, in my mind, I don't think of it as an either or type of thing. either you have regional standards or you have national standards. Ideally, the regional standards and national standards would be aligned with one another, and they serve different purposes. I can explain a little bit. I'm sure there are others on the phone who know this domain much better than I do. But in West Africa, for example, the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency has a mandate to consider and put forth regional standards at the regional level, or for adoption at the regional level. And these standards, once adopted by ECOWAS, serve as a model essentially for the member countries within the ECOWAS region to adopt at the national level. So in that way, the regional and national level standards kind of complement each other, because the actual any kind of enforcement actions, market monitoring and enforcement action is necessarily taken at the country level, but the regional level body can serve a kind of coordinating function and provide a template for the countries to then adopt and run with. Oh, here's a question about, let's see, assuming the necessary preconditions are in place, how would you begin developing standards for off-grid appliances? That's a very good question. We have some guidance on that point in the policy brief. I think that one thing that we'd like to encourage people who are interested in adopting standards to do is to reach out and contact the Efficiency for Access Coalition. And you can do so either by contacting one of us after this or through the Efficiency for Access website. We have a form for getting in touch with the coalition. And the reason that would be helpful is because one of the things that the coalition is exploring right now is the need for standards for off-grid appropriate appliances. And it's really critical that we hear from people out in the world who could make use of these standards. We want to find out if there are governments that are interested in developing standards and for what purposes. And then we can serve a kind of coordinating, serve as a coordinating body to help bring together folks from different places and learn from each other and figure out what appropriate standards would be for specific off-grid appliances. So I think the first step is to reach out and try to get connected with others who are doing the same, because as you heard earlier, there are real benefits to aligning approaches to evaluating appliances across geographies, and that goes both for the test methods that are used to test the products, and also for any standards that are used to evaluate the results from those tests. Any other questions that you see coming in, Naomi?
Did we mention I guess we did touch on everything. It looks like Jeremy might have said that he had another comment to add. Did we get to that? About encouraging and mandating to making available good quality product performance information?
Yeah, let's invite Jeremy to go ahead and make that comment over the line. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, 1 second.
Thanks, Harry. Yeah, Jeremy Tate here again.
Perfect.
Yeah.
decisions and purchasing decisions. So that's a very good point, and thanks for bringing that up. Anything else here?
Okay, let's see. It looks like we have Nixon on the phone. Can you hear us?
So Nixon joined by phone?
He has joined. I think he's trying to connect to the audio.
Okay.
In the meantime, I wonder if we can get Jeremy back, because I just had a thought about what he was talking about in terms of when to introduce standards. So I wonder if we can unmute him again. Jeremy, if you're still there.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, Jeremy.
Okay.
Hearing, yes.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Hi, Nixon. Good to hear your voice. Thanks for joining us. Nixon, could you start out by, we've kind of done things out of order. So we, Naomi did her presentation and we had some Q&A, and now I have some questions I'd like you to respond to, if that's okay.
I don't think Nixon has his audio on just yet.
Okay.
Yeah, let's give him a few minutes. So Jeremy, the question that I had for you is, having looked at the off-grid refrigerator market, as you have in the products, how fast is the innovation happening? Because one of the things that will end up happening is that country or region starts developing standards for off-grid products, off-grid refrigerators, for example. And by the time they're done with the standards development process, that standard is already obsolete because the innovation has moved past whatever the minimum requirements were put in the standard. So how fast do you see that innovation happening?
Yes, to be honest, I wish we had a better picture of that, but from what we've heard so far, it seems that innovation of products for this particular market is not happening very fast because of the economic constraints that the suppliers are working under. I mean, there are some very, very clever systems. There are some very clever manufacturers who are tailoring and developing appliances that are suitable, but the traction that they're getting in the market is really quite limited so far because of the economic challenges here. And it seemed that the only way that the main route that seems open to exploit in the near future seems to be where the appliances are used for productive use. So it's earning revenue for a small business, whether it's a cafe, a shop, a restaurant, a dairy, small farm, etc., where it's contributing to the revenues of that business. That's where we can see some progress possible. And there's been a lot of innovation in terms of refrigeration, making it work very efficiently, very well off-grid, very reliably off-grid for the vaccine market. But the economics of that are so different to even a commercial market, and certainly for in terms of a household market. The value of these off-grid appliances used for vaccines are 2 or 3 orders of magnitude higher than could be afforded by many of the very small businesses that we're looking at in terms of growing a mass market. So I think many of the technologies are out there. They're not being applied to this particular market yet due to the economic constraints. And I think there are a number of specific technical barriers where innovation is needed, which you've identified in the roadmap. And one of those is actually availability of high efficiency compressors, refrigeration compressors, in sufficient quantities at the right price point and with the right controllability to really help the appliance suppliers, the system providers, to give them the tools to really get on and do their job. So compressor technology was one of the areas that I think there is a need for focus, and that's why it was presented as a priority in the recent call for R&D grants. Yeah, we're hoping to get more focus from some of the compressor manufacturers in that. And the controls area is another one where there's a need for innovation, and there's a good project which is started now, led by Solaris, I believe. So it's one of the R&D grant programs kicked off from the first call, and that is looking at developing an open source control protocol for, as I understand it, energy supply networks, so communication between devices, and that's exactly the sort of control protocols that will be needed to be able to switch off your ice maker at times when everybody else needs the power for their TVs, their lights, fans, whatever, and then switch it back on as soon as the power is available to keep those high demand appliances running. So yeah, I think economics is holding it back, but there's some very good innovators out there. There are some very good technologies already well established in other markets that could be transferred, but there are some very specific things for this market which I think we can focus on in the programs to try and make sure they're delivered. So yes, very hopeful that we can help bring the market players together to move this forward.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
So it looks like we have Nixon on the line. Nixon? Looks like you're on mute. You might need to unmute yourself.
Can you speak? So you're muted, so you need to unmute yourself.
Look for the little icon of a phone. It's red.
Yeah, that needs to be should be green. There we go. Can you hear us?
Yes, I do.
Perfect. Welcome to the webinar.
Sorry, I'm late.
I
couldn't get the email.
Ari Reeves here.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. So we did things a little out of order. We started with the presentation of the policy brief from Naomi, and we did a Q&A. We have, unfortunately, Charles Diarra wasn't able to join us, so you're our panelist, and we'd love to hear from you. So I have a few questions. I wanted to first start out with introducing you and hearing about what your organization is doing related to the promotion of high quality efficient appliances. So first off, Nixon, I understand you're the Senior Renewable Energy Officer at Kenya's Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, formerly the Energy Regulatory Commission, ERC. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so far so good. So tell us a little bit about what the ERC has been doing relative to off-grid appliances.
Basically, now we do promote, we do regulate the energy space. That's including off-grid solar systems. That's the installation. But on the appliance specifically, we we are now looking at doing standards for some of those appliances and having them captured in the regulations.
Which appliances in particular?
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. I asked which appliances in particular?
For example, we have MEPS, the minimum energy performance standards for refrigerating appliances, which we are trying to apply across, provided the refrigerator has an AC input. So if a refrigerator has only DC, then in that case we don't regulate. But if it has AC and DC, then we require that it should be tested for minimum energy performance using a Kenyan standard that has already been put in place. We also working to develop standards for LED TVs and also incorporating that into MEPS. Yeah, so those are some of the initiatives that you are doing now.
So you said you have MEPS for refrigerators, for AC refrigerators, and if it takes both an AC, if the unit takes both an AC or a DC input, then it's also subject to the same requirements.
Yeah, unless it's just taking DC. But if it has both inputs, then it's supposed to be taken through the MEPS, Minimum Energy Performance Program.
Okay. And do you anticipate that the television MEPS will be designed the same way? So that
yes, and
a DC-only TV would not be subject to the MEPS, but the DC or AC would be.
Yes, that's correct. And also LED lights.
Okay, interesting. Is ERC considering any measures for products that are specifically designed for off-grid use?
Which product specifically?
So that would be a fan or a television or a solar water pump maybe, or anything else that's designed specifically for use in an off-grid setting as part of a solar energy system.
For us, we look at the technology, so whether DC or AC. If you have MEPS for LED lights, then it will include DC.
Mm-hmm. You said you have MEPS for LED lights.
We are looking at
what was the last part?
Yeah, we are in the process of developing standards for LED lights. So these lights,
and those would be both AC and DC powered?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, interesting. And what are your thoughts about regional standards and national standards and the roles of regional bodies in relation to developing standards?
I think developing standards for per country, at times it's easier in terms of the process, but it's easier in implementation when the standards are adopted across the region. So in most cases, it's good to start with a case study, maybe for one country, then maybe convince the other member states to adopt the standards across the region. For example, for Kenya, maybe it would be good if MEPS is adopted by our neighbors, that's Tanzania and Uganda, Southern Sudan, Somalia, so that we do away with the black market where people could import goods to a neighboring country and smuggle them into a country where we have the minimum energy performance standards. So in the process of development, having MEPS for a country is easier for a start than having it for a region, because then you'll have to do a lot of agreements and discussions. But once you have for a country, then you can adopt across the region. So that would be my comment.
Are you aware of efforts at the regional level in the East African community right now related to MEPS for appliances?
For off-grid appliances or for any appliance?
Or on-grid. Thinking that if there are activities related to MEPS or standards for on-grid appliances, that could serve as a model for similar efforts in the future related to off-grid.
We have an association of regulators across the region, and in our meetings we've been trying to engage them so that they adopt the minimum energy performance or the energy performance standards for in the other countries. But I'm aware Uganda was trying to do their own standards. In fact, they tried the program earlier than Kenya, but for us, it has been able to move forward compared to the other countries. But in the last financial year, we were trying to identify some of the regulations that we have, which are not in our neighboring countries, and also which they have that we don't have. And one of the standards that was being looked at was the minimum, or the standards and labeling program for the other countries. So we are trying to engage them to see if they could be able to adopt the standards across the region.
Fascinating. If you were to, well, I'll come back to the regional level activity in a moment. So you explained that the MEPS that the ERC develops for appliances apply to those that take power either from AC alone or AC and DC. Has ERC looked at the possibility of developing measures for off-grid appliances specifically? That is, perhaps that might be products that only accept DC power, and if so, why? If not, why?
Pardon the question. Sorry, someone interrupted.
The question was whether ERC. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. My question was whether the ERC has looked at the possibility of creating maps or setting standards of some kind for off-grid appliances. I guess that would be appliances that are powered by DC only. Is that something? Is that not within your mandate, or it's just not something that you've looked at?
For a mandate to do regulation based on the existing standards, but we try and we engage the standards body wherever we feel there's need to develop standards that are specifically targeting given appliances. But at the moment, I don't think there's been that critical mass to just develop standards for the off-grid, the DC appliances alone. Because what usually happens, you have to look at the market, the size of the market before you even develop the standards or the regulations for that matter. Specifically regulations. There could be some standards, maybe I would check, but not on energy performance. But once the market is big enough, then you can look at developing minimum energy performance standards for those appliances. So as of now, I don't think there's been that critical mass for developing a regulation to enforce MEPS for the off-grid appliances. Mostly now the standards body will be looking at is the quality of the appliances, which I'm aware they have some of the standards for that.
Mm-hmm. And what is there a specific trigger? Is there a regular review to determine which products, for which products ERC will develop maps?
Mostly it's informed by, we do a study, because ideally the minimum energy performance standards are targeted to save a given amount of energy. So when you're doing MEPS, you then identify those appliances that will have the most significant impact in terms of saving on consumption. So if you have maybe 10% of the energy consumption going to a given appliance compared to the others, then we'd say it's significant for you to be able to develop MEPS for that appliance. But for as long as the consumption is not significant, meaning you cannot realize much savings by having some minimum energy performance standards, then it doesn't really warrant you to develop the program for that appliance. For instance, before we did for the AC and refrigerators, there was a study that established most of the local consumers do use refrigerators, do use lights, do use air conditioners and motors. So with that, then we were able to develop MEPS for that appliance, those appliances. Then over time, there's been need to develop MEPS for LED TVs and also LED lights, because then the uptake is also a bit high compared to the other energy consuming appliances. So mostly is the critical mass in terms of the appliances themselves, how much they will contribute to energy savings before you now develop standards for that. But in case the appliance does not warrant a significant savings, then you just do the normal performance standards for the appliance, not necessarily minimum energy performance.
So there isn't another criterion about protecting consumers from poor quality products. The focus is really on the on energy savings and limiting the growth of energy consumption.
At the moment, what we have, I think there's a standard for only the off-grid on. It's not specifically on energy, but it's the quality of the product. Maybe for solar lights, because you're looking at first on the quality and market being significant before you now do minimum energy performance standards, depending on the amount of savings that you would realize. For instance, you may not invest in a program where you'll save the amount that you're going to save is less than what you'd put to have the program up and running. Most of the time, that's the consideration. Yes, because it's a process to have the minimum energy performance standards in place, and even to enforce them is also a cost. So you have to look at the cost benefit analysis before you take up the program for a given appliance.
There was some, I know we need to wrap up in just a minute. I wanted to ask one question. There was some discussion earlier about information requirements and the role of regulation in requiring manufacturers to be clear about how products perform and put factual information on their products, really to help end consumers as well as other market actors like distributors and the regulatory authority to better understand what's on the market. Could you say a few words about the role of the MEPS in Kenya in terms of kind of making information, good information about products available?
Okay. But I think that could be enforced through the technical standards for the given appliance, maybe by requiring that some information is included on the nameplate, because that is an easier way of informing the customers, rather than doing a full program that does not have a bearing on the energy savings that you may, in terms of cost benefit analysis.
So you're pointing to the possibility of a standard like a KEBS, a national standard developed by KEBS, kind of serving that purpose without needing a regulation and a regulatory program.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, interesting.
Yes.
We did have one question from the audience, real quick, if you don't mind answering that. It is, what is the relationship between standard body and the regulatory body before standard is developed?
The relationship between the standards body and?
Yes, the relationship between a standard body and the regulatory body before the standard is developed.
In this case, they work hand in hand because the process of developing standards can be initiated by the players in the market. For instance, if they feel that there's need to develop a standard to do away with some substandard products or to meet some minimum performance requirements, then they request for the standards to be developed. In some cases, the regulator can request the standards body to coordinate, because they just coordinate the development of standards. Maybe for MEPs, for instance, we could feel there's significant market enough to regulate the minimum energy performance of an appliance, and in that case, we request the KEBS body the standards body to initiate the process for developing that. Because once they do the standards, then we'll develop regulations to enforce the standard and come up with mechanisms to ensure there's compliance.
Thanks, Nixon. And thank you for joining us today. I think
yes.
we've come to the end of the session.
Yes, thank you so much to everybody for joining, and all the audience for commenting. And if we didn't get to your question, we will send them out to the panelists and to our presenters that spoke today, and they will get back to you individually afterwards. But on behalf of the Clean Energy Solutions Center, I would like to extend a thank you to all of our expert panelists and to our attendees for participating in today's webinar. We very much appreciate your time and hope in return that there were some valuable insights that you may take back to your ministries, departments, or organizations. We also invite you to inform your colleagues and those in your networks about Solutions Center resources and services, including no-cost policy support through our Ask an Expert service. I invite you to check the Solutions Center website if you'd like to view the slides and listen to the recording of today's presentations, as well as previously held webinars. Additionally, you will find on upcoming webinars and other training events. We are now also posting webinar recordings to the Clean Energy Solutions Center YouTube channel. Please allow for about a week for the audio recording to be posted. Finally, I would like to kindly ask you to take a moment to complete the short survey that will appear when we conclude the webinar. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to see you again at a future Clean Energy Solutions Center. This concludes our webinar.
This has been Bart. Amemaliza.